al profe Juan Manuel, entonces que empecemos. Profe, un gusto tenerlo con nosotros y poderlo escuchar de nuevo. Así que estamos muy contentos de que haya aceptado estar. Tenemos problemas con la transmisión en vivo, así que vamos a estar por aquí solamente en la sala de Zoom y estamos grabando la sesión ya para compartirla en redes sociales y que quede entonces, digamos, para que la gente pueda acceder a la sesión después. ¿Listo? Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Revise a ver ahí qué está pasando con el micrófono.
Ahí se escucha.
Sí, ahí lo escuchamos.
All right, okay, let me turn on my camera and switch codes to English. Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to this very first session of CodeSwitch, one of those ecosystems now germinating at the program. We hope to make this space as impactful and as meaningful and interesting as possible. There are two ways in which we're switching codes today. The first of them is that we're taking distance from our roles as students and as teachers, and we're coming together around the plain interest and attentiveness for ideas, discussions on concepts, implementation of projects that researchers come here to share because it is relevant for them or their communities and their contexts. So basically what we're doing is cultivating a culture of thinking and appreciation around research in language education. Secondly, what we're doing here by switching codes is that we're trying to make research accessible. Although research is taken to be very rigorous and demanding, we would like for this space to be inspirational for those that are not very knowledgeable or are not very familiar with what research entails. With that being said, well, let me just remind you that CodeSwitch will take place every 2 weeks approximately. We will have different guests around different topics. So we hope you still join us whenever possible. And once again, welcome. Without further ado, I'm introducing our first presenter, which by now is a very dear guest lecturer and keynote speaker at the program, Professor Jaime Usma. He's a teacher, educator, researcher, and director of the School of Languages at Universidad de Antioquia in Colombia. He combines his research, publications, and teaching on foreign language and education policy making with an active participation in policy and professional development initiatives at the school, university, and city level. During the last 15 years, he has focused on critical and comparative studies on language education policies in Colombia in connection with the promotion of language education reforms that respond to a diverse and multilingual, but highly unequal and complex country such as Colombia. This conversation precisely will account for that agenda, and in today's presentation, which is called Promoting Plurilingual and Intercultural Policies, Discourses, and Practices in Higher Education, the case of Universidad de Antioquia, we will learn a lot. So, Professor Usma, thank you very much for joining us today, and take it away.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I really hope we can have a good conversation on all what we are doing at the university and the experience of promoting plurilingualism and diversity in higher education in my university, Universidad de Antioquia. So thank you, Isabel, for having me here. It's always my pleasure to be at UTP in different academic scenarios. So So my presentation will go, I will use the experience that I have had with with a group of teachers and students in my university. I will use that work as the basis for as the basis to present what we are doing at the university. I will share my screen. Let me know if you can see this presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, sir, we're seeing it.
Okay, so I will start with this research project, which is called Lenguajes para la Permanencia, una propuesta desde la interculturalidad crítica. This is a whole research agenda. And we have been working with a group of people, including students, including other researchers, and you have the names of these people here. But I could also include other people that are not here, but in general terms, this is the people that have been working with me in the last years. So let me share the agenda. So I will start with the context of our inquiry and go with the critical view of interculturality and intercultural dialogue as the theoretical basis for what we do. And then I will describe some of the projects we have been doing in the promotion of critical interculturality and diversity. And then I will finish my presentation with some of the projects we have or programs we have at the university. This is basically the context of our inquiry. It's basically, we are responding to the internationalization of higher education and how in the context of internationalization of higher education, English is being promoted as the language of power and as a lingua franca in higher education. In this context, a lot of institutions are promoting a bilingual English and Spanish bilingual policies. And this is the case of Universidad de Antioquia, where the new institutional policy in 2014 introduced 5 levels of English. B1 expected and is mandatory for all students. English in this context was basically equated with internationalization of higher education and education quality. With this type of policies, we know basically what we are promoting is an instrumental view of languages, where languages are perceived as an essential tool, as an instrument to get a good job, to get a better salary, etc., etc. So with that idea in mind, with those questions in mind, we started a series of research projects where basically we wanted to know the impact of these English policies on students, on the university in general. In 2016, we started with a project that basically analyzed how English could be a potential factor for students dropout at the university in the context of the new institutional policy at the university. In 2018, and based on the findings of this initial project, we started a research project, a pilot program to support our students from ethnic communities in their learning of Spanish and English from an intercultural perspective. And this project was funded by the University of Antioquia and the Ministry of National Education. In 2019, continuing with these 2 previous projects, we worked on a project called Language in Post-Conflict Zones, Educating for Success in Colombia, Lebanon, and South Africa. And this was a project funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK. The international researcher leading the project was Angela Chris, and I was the leading researcher in Colombia. In 2020, we continued working with this idea, and we worked with a project called Lenguajes para la Permanencia, una propuesta desde la interculturalidad crítica, and we have continued to work on that research line, and this project was funded by Universidad de Antioquia and University of Stirling. Let me talk a little bit about this idea of critical interculturality, which is basically the basis for our work. We know that a lot of people are now understanding that there is a connection between language and culture, right? But we haven't understood that connection very well, and now we are talking about interculturality. Then we have not understood enough what interculturality implies and means, and now we are talking about critical interculturality. So we are basically moving from one concept to another one without really understanding the implications of all of those concepts. Basically, I can say that each of those concepts imply or represent a different view of society, a different view of languages, and a different view of culture and the connection between culture and languages. Usually, when we make a connection between language and culture, we say that when we teach a language, we are also teaching culture. We are basically also having an instrumental and very limited view of culture in connection with a particular territory or country and a particular group of people within that territory or country. Usually, for example, when we talk about French as a language and the culture associated with French, we usually associate that culture with a particular group in a particular country, in a particular historic moment. So to respond to those limitations, we have been talking about interculturality, but basically what we have been doing is having a very functional view of interculturality. It's basically responding to this idea of sharing a particular place and understanding each other as a way of surviving, as a way of learning about the other so we can understand why that person behaves in this particular way or another particular way. But when we talk about critical interculturality, basically we are talking about something really different. We are adopting or embracing a decolonial view of education, of life, of politics, of culture, etc., etc. And from this perspective, we are basically responding to the need to understand the relationship and the power relationships associated with colonial movements that have accompanied the history of Latin America, for example, and how those colonial processes have basically shaped the way we in Latin America and the way we, for example, in Colombia and different people in Colombia perceive themselves in connection with other people, how we value our languages, how we value the way we understand the world, etc. How we understand languages such as English, for example, in a very multilingual and pluricultural country such as Colombia. So basically, we understand critical interculturality as an ethical and political project that is going beyond borders and that is trying to respond to the need to promote multicultural citizenships and to improve the living conditions for everyone. We also, from this critical intercultural perspective, we try to validate linguistic cultural and epistemic diversity. And it is really, really important to understand this. It's not just to validate linguistic diversity or cultural diversity, but also in connection with that diversity to understand that there are multiple ways of understanding the world and understanding who we are and how we live in this world and where we come from, why things happen, etc. Also, what we are trying to do with this critical intercultural perspective is to promote intercultural dialogue. We also struggle against inferiorization, racialization of people, and subalternization in our colonial societies. We really understand this society as a very colonial product of years and years and years of colonial thought and colonial practices. We also encourage and render visible different forms of knowledge, cosmogonies, and ways of being destroyed by coloniality. And here we really understand there is a difference between colonization and coloniality. Colonization as a product of, or as a process of invasion, expropriation, etc., and coloniality as the colonization of our minds as a consequence or in combination with colonization. So there are multiple authors that we have been using in our project, and these are some of them. So coming from this perspective, we have been doing several projects. One of them was the exploratory case study that we started in 2016. This one that I mentioned, the 2016-2017 project. And this is an exploratory case study where we investigated the sociolinguistic profile of the students at Universidad de Antioquia. We found that more than 3,000 students in our university are coming from ethnic communities. 25% of them are indigenous, 41% are mulattoes, 33% are Afro-raizales or palenqueros, and 1% are Romani. Taking the indigenous students, we found that there are 876 indigenous students representing 18 different pueblos and 22 different languages. 84% of them speak Spanish as their first language, which was a very surprising finding for us, because we could assume that as we have this number of indigenous students, we also have a lot of different languages, and that all these different indigenous students, the 876 students speak an indigenous language as their first language, but we found that only 16% of them speak an indigenous language as their first language. And they come from 25 different departamentos in Colombia. And this is more or less a representation of the presence of all of these languages in our university, being Ibera the most spoken language in the indigenous students, followed by Nasayue, Inga, and Namtric. And there are other indigenous languages that are not as powerful, but that are spoken in the campus. Some views and challenges that we found. We found a positive perception of English and its learning and the language policy at the university, which again is a bilingual English and Spanish policy. 79% of the students have a positive perception of that policy. 18% of the students have a negative perception of English, or have a negative perception of learning English or the language policy. And 62% manifested difficulties in their learning process when they talk about English in higher education, in secondary schools. So 62%, which is a very high number, and calls the attention about the difficulties that students have in secondary school, and how all of these difficulties have an impact in how they perceive English when they come to the university. 3% of them manifested resistance to learn English. They perceive English as an imposition, as a synonym of exclusion, and a threat to their own indigenous or native languages. We also found that 9% of the students hide their identity as indigenous when they come to the university because they don't want to be discriminated against other students when they are in their classes or in the campus. 16% of the students manifested that their indigenous or ancestral languages are disappearing. And we also found difficulties to face the challenges, the academic challenges at the university. That this is a common pattern when you talk about indigenous or Afro communities in the university. They struggle a lot when they are accepted and they start their programs in the university. Coming from this first project, we thought about a second project, which is called Languages for Permanence. Languages for Permanence, a proposal from critical interculturality. Basically, what we wanted to do with this project was to explore in which ways a critical intercultural approach to language teaching, centered on the recognition and validation of ethnic, epistemic, cultural, and linguistic diversity, can favor foreign language learning, strengthening learners' identities, and contributing to the permanence of students coming from ethnic communities in higher education. So this is more or less like the product of, or a practical application of the previous findings. We wanted to see how, with a critical intercultural approach, we could challenge many of those findings and limitations that we have in the university when you talk with students about their perceptions about English. We wanted to reach more language educators and students at the university, and we wanted to have a greater impact on the different programs at the School of Languages, including the Foreign Language Teacher Education program in our university. We had two basic components, one related to students and the other one related to teachers. In terms of the students, we created an English course for ethnic community students, and we call it Aprender Inglés en la Universidad. And we also, coming with, or as part of this course, we had a lot of ongoing and comprehensive support to students. So we basically created a course, an English course with this critical intercultural perspective, and we call it that way. And with teachers, we created a professional development course called Enseñar Lenguas Extranjeras en la Universidad, una mirada desde la interculturalidad. And basically what we did was to do a lot of different workshops and a lot of different readings and discussions with teachers. And we also created different materials, and the different teachers created their own English courses, applying the concepts we were learning or discussing in the course, in the different workshops. In terms of the students, this is more or less what we did in the course. We're talking about a 40 hours course. 30 hours were synchronous sessions, and 10 hours were asynchronous work. And we did it in the middle of the pandemic in October and January 2021. And we had two groups of students, one on Wednesdays and one on Fridays. 15 students participated in this course, and all of them were students in the first semester. They were just admitted in the university, and they were taking the institutional English program. So it was a way of our course was complementing the institutional English program. Basically, the goal of this course was this, to generate a space for integral or complete support for learning and to get closer to English, so students may understand different visions about this language and about their own first languages. And at the same time, we wanted to recognize the impact that these languages have on their identities, cultural and individual identities, and their interactions with the other people, with the other students, and with the world in general. We had a very positive findings as part of this project. Some of those positive findings are related to their own identities and how they understood their own communities, and how they found very interesting connections with their territories, coming from questions like ¿quién soy yo? ¿De dónde vengo? ¿Qué lenguas hablo? Etcétera, etcétera. Also, in terms of identity and diversity, we were exploring questions related to how I connect with the world, how I interact with my communities, with the communities that have other languages, including English, etc. With these different questions and how and the way we did the courses, which was basically highlighting identities in the class and making connections between English and the students and their identities and their cultural backgrounds and the territories where they live, etc., their families, etc., their traditions, etc. We had a lot of promotion of intercultural dialogue. It was very interesting to see how students learn from each other and how they started to see English, not as the colonial language that historically has been communicated to them, but also as a means to highlight who they are and how they can be better human beings when they come to the university, in connection with their own territories and languages and communities. In the promotion of intercultural dialogue, we promoted that all languages have a role in the classroom. We strengthened all identities, and we promoted a lot of critical reflection. Some of the pedagogical strategies we used, we created texts around individual and cultural identity. What we call identity texts. We use different modes for meaning making using multimodal texts. We had different conversations in terms of different questions that I presented to you before here on the left. And we had a lot of materials that involved different representations of individuals and a lot of collaborative writing and multilingual writing. In terms of teachers, we also created a course, 40 hours course, and we did it between October and December 2021, also in the middle of the pandemic. We had 17 teachers, English teachers, all of them, participating in this course. And we had teachers from different programs in the university, from the foreign language teaching program, from a program we have called Multilingual, and also the English, the institutional English program. We also, with them, we talked about different themes, such as diversity in Colombia, and at the university, they didn't know much about this. For example, how many indigenous languages we have in the country, where they are spoken, what type of students we have in the university in terms of diversity, what languages are spoken by them, etc., etc. We also worked on our own understandings of culture and interculturality, and we read about different perspectives in terms of culture and interculturality. We worked on intercultural education. We explored different perspectives from coming from Bayram, Aguado, Durban, etc., Latin American perspectives, European perspectives, etc. And also we worked on critical interculturality and in connection with those other perspectives and what's the difference and how they connect, how they can be put together in terms of how we promote intercultural dialogue. We also had ongoing connections with foreign language teaching, exploring how those concepts could be applied in our classes. We also promote a lot of intercultural dialogue through exchanges among participants and respect for different views, promoting spaces for discussion and promoting critical reflection. Some of the methodological components include independent readings, class presentations, class discussions, individual reflections, and small group discussions, and a lot of different practical activities through projects that teachers did and applied in their own classes. In terms of what we got from this class, I can highlight the awareness that we got in terms of diversity. This was recognized by teachers as a big improvement that they had in their own understanding of diversity in the country and how they can promote that awareness about diversity in their own classes. And this is one of the teachers saying something about what he learned. Recognizing diversity in our classrooms. We also talked a lot about different types of diversities and how all of them can be included in our classes and implications of promoting this dialogue in our English courses. We also problematize discourses in foreign language teaching. For example, in terms of language varieties, look at what this teacher said. Por ejemplo, yo hablo inglés desde mi acento chocuano. Lo que concluimos es que en la clase se debe promover la diversidad, no solo con actividades, pero mostrarles que hay otros acentos, variaciones lingüísticas, y que cuando ellas quieran un idioma, van a hablar con diferentes personas de todo el mundo. We also obtain a lot of different representations of native speakers, and we promoted that understanding and that empathy in terms of how different people have different accents, etc. And we also question this historic tendency that we have in our field to import methodologies and materials, making our own culture and our own diversity invisible in our English classes. And you can see here what the teacher says. We also build a lot on our own understandings of interculturality. And here are some of the testimonies of our participants. One of them, creemos que la interculturalidad es esa oportunidad que tienen todas las manifestaciones culturales o las diversidades culturales para poder conversar, escucharse el uno al otro sobre unos procesos que aquí se estaban refiriendo, porque a veces no hay como apertura, es aperturas frente a esas identidades. And so here we have some examples of how people expressed their gainings in terms of interculturality, openness to diversity, etc. Look at what the people in the last excerpt says. Cuando se escoge un material, hay que analizar muy bien las características del material, quién lo hace, cómo lo hace, develar las intenciones del material para poder aprovecharlo. Some questions we had here that we have from our classes. ¿Qué es lo que nos está pasando como seres culturales? ¿Por qué tapamos el origen? ¿Qué es lo más bonito del ser? ¿De dónde vienes? Pero si no sabes de dónde vienes, si no quieres darle valor a eso, entonces, ¿cómo comienzas a llegar a otras culturas? And we have some other questions that we see as really, really important. With open spaces for students to talk about their lives, identities, places, and the places where they come from. And you see one of the students here coming from a very rural part of Antioquia called Nechi, and how she was doing a project talking about her culture and how she was making a connection between her culture and English, and how she was using English to highlight the value of her own culture and traditions, etc. Here we also have another student problematizing texts and how we were looking at, for example, this image when they are describing La Cuisine Colombian and La Cuisine Française, and why we are promoting this type of Colombian cuisine and this type of French cuisine. So we have some questions here that are really, really important for us, and that show how by doing this type of professional development program, we started to problematize different givens that are part of who we are as English teachers in a country like Colombia. We also worked on making meaning of university life, and students were questioning a lot of different ideas or practices or discourses that they see when they come from a rural or an indigenous or an Afro community, and they come to a city like Medellin and a campus such as UDA, and why things are organized or described or created in the way. So, for example, what does it mean for you to be a UDA student? What do people say about UDA students? Do you agree with what they say, etc., etc.? I will go a little bit with some of the current agenda we have, and then I will move into, I will go into some of the projects we have right now. Based on all these different projects, what we have been doing, we have been working on the creation of a national network on language policy and diversity with different universities in Colombia. We started with the University of Stirling with the grant that we got from the UK. And we started with some universities such as Universidad de Antioquia, Universidad del Valle, Universidad de Sucre, but now we have a bigger number of universities, about 12 different universities, including UTP, and Professora Isabel is part of the network. What we are trying to promote in the network is to create a space where we, all universities, can share ideas and practices about that promote language diversity and on the different types of diversities in higher education. We are working on the creation of a web page. We are also working, we have created some materials, and we have been able to get some funding for future research projects. Just last week, I got an invitation to participate in another grant in the UK. So I will be working on that project so that we can generate more resources for future projects on these topics. We have been working on further data analysis and writing, and we have been working on language education policies and programs at the local and national level. I will go to finish. I will go with this. I will show you this. Let me see. Give me 1 second. Here, I will tell you a little bit about what we are doing at the university and how we are promoting diversity and language diversity at in the university as part of all the different projects, and more or less how we envision the work that we have to do in terms of the promotion of diversity and more plurilingual or multilingual policies in our context. So first, I want to highlight the program we called multilingual, where we teach several international languages, but at the same time, some ancestral languages from Colombia. So we are teaching here courses in Alemán, in French, in Italian, in Portuguese, in Japanese, in Chinese, but we are also teaching some courses in Creole, Berachami, Wajunaki, and Minica. We also, here you have all these different languages, but I also wanna highlight how we are going with these courses to the different regions in Antioquia, and how we are also moving towards virtual courses in languages such as Portuguese, and how we are promoting ancestral languages, and how from the School of Languages we are promoting more and more and more intercultural dialogue through courses like this. Right now, I can also say that we are working with on the promotion of Colombian Sign Language, and we were able to get a full-time teacher to create a whole agenda for Colombian Sign Language for the whole university, and that teacher will be based on this School of Languages. And now we are working on different courses on Colombian Sign Language, and also on interpretation in Colombian Sign Language. So we are working on a very, very plurilingual, multilingual agenda. And all of this, I can say, has been originated from these research projects that we did. I think that's it. And I will also ask you to ask me questions, and then have a conversation on what I have shared with you. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks to you, Professor Usma, for your intervention today. So the floor is open. There are many different things we could unpack here. So any questions are welcome. Remember, there are a very interesting notions, just to kind of like refresh a little bit what just was presented. We have the notion of plurilingualism, critical interculturality, colonialization, and therefore decolonialization, course design around critical interculturality, professional development, policy making, identity from both the cultural and academic standpoints, discourses. There are many different things here that we could ask today, Professor Usma, that maybe that you today feel you would like to know more about. Maybe remember that you can either post the questions in the chat for Professor Usma to read, or if you want just to address him directly orally through the microphone, you're welcome to do so. So anyone who would like to begin?
I just wanted to say, Juan, that this is a good summary. Thank you for that summary. I was saying that I would like to say that we have started to talk about these concepts, and what I'm trying to do is to show you that we can move from the concepts to the application of those concepts in real practices and policies in our universities. But you can also do this in secondary schools. But I'm talking about universities. It's not easy because it implies a lot of changes, epistemic changes, power relations. You need to move to be able to question status quo, a lot of givens, a lot of concepts that we have used when we educate future teachers. And it's an ongoing process. It's not finished, but it's something we started and something we are open to continue. And it's not easy. And there is not a way to do this. It's just the way we have been doing it. but there are multiple ways of doing this. But the important thing is to be willing to question givens and to think that there are other possibilities to do what we have been doing or to do what we do, and to understand languages, to understand identities, to understand cultures in a very, very diverse country such as Colombia. So that's more or less. Thank you, Juan, for the summary.
No, thank you very much for expanding on the motivations and purposes of the project, Professor. We have one question coming from Camilo Betancourt. Go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much, Juan Manuel. Can you listen to me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you as well, Professor Usma, for such interesting presentation on interculturality. And well, I have known for several years that your field of work is that, and I have had the experience to, well, get to know a little bit how the process of language approval works at the UDA. I would like to know a couple of things. The first one is, how was the process of getting the university to actually recognize the different languages, indigenous languages of Colombia, as part of the repertoire of the students that come to the university? Because hearing, I understand that the students at UTP are kind of struggling with the same situation, and there have been some progress in that regard of the recognition of the languages, but we're not quite still there. So how is that process? And the second question is more, if we can have the opportunity to see the material or any sort of products that can be available for the whole community. I mean, in terms of the course that you have created, the syllabi, or the material that can be shareable to all the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Camilo, for the question. Okay, this is a whole process. It's not some. It didn't start with me, but what I did with the group of people that I started to work in, like in 2015, more or less, was to basically what we did was to ask questions that we were not asking. But the university has a long tradition of in the recognition of diversity and in the promotion of diversity in the campus. It's a long tradition. For example, right now we are celebrating that. I don't know, maybe you saw that two of the people who are taking leading positions in the current government are indigenous. Have you seen that? And both of them are from this university. So because we have a long tradition in the promotion of ethnicity and diversity and in the inclusion of ethnic groups in the university. Okay, so coming from that, I can say that something we did that was basically something we did that was new was to ask questions. For example, one of the questions was, what does it mean to be indigenous in this university? How many indigenous students we have? Where do they come from? What languages do they speak? What do they think about English? How many of them have lost their first language? What programs are they in? What are their notions of their own pueblos and identities, et cetera, et cetera. And so we started to ask questions that were not being asked. And we asked those questions because we really needed to know the answers to be able to make a proposal for the teaching of English from an intercultural perspective. Because if you don't know who are the people, then what type of proposal you will be making, right? So when we asked those questions, we found that we found a lot of interesting people because they had never had the opportunity to respond to those questions. And I can say that the study we did in 2016, which we called a sociolinguistic diagnosis of indigenous students at the university, is being used in the university as a resource to promote more diversity in terms of language and in terms of what type of programs can be promoted in the university. And also other universities in Colombia have used that study as a basis to do their own sociolinguistic diagnosis, to understand the diversity in their own campuses. So it's like you are doing something that is new, but in the context of something that is not new. You see my point. We didn't start with this, but we asked new questions. And based on the responses, we started to promote more and more programs, which is basically what we are doing right now. And we started with the indigenous language courses, and we promoted the creation of those courses. And now what we are trying to promote is diversity in terms of a Colombian Sign Language. So now we are moving forward, another step forward. And so kind of we start with this, but then we move to this, and then we move to that. And that's more or less what we are doing. I don't know what other questions you have, but more or less that's what we have been doing.
All right. We move forward with Professor Sanchez, who also raised her hand.
¿De aquí se escucha? Sí, se escucha.
Yes.
Dale.
Bueno, por aquí. Hola Jaime, ¿qué más? Con Daniel Murcia.
Hola Daniel. ¿Qué más, hermano? Bien.
¿Cómo va todo? Muy bien.
Gusto verte.
Jaime, muchas gracias por este proceso que usted desarrolla normalmente desde la... Esperemos un momentico a ver. Yo creo que ya. Ok, bueno. De todas maneras, quería agradecer, Jaime, por comentar el panorama de cómo en Antioquia normalmente se desarrollan todos estos procesos que tienen que ver con teorías críticas y de colonización, y obviamente con el campo de la interculturalidad. Pero yo quiero, pues, consultarle a usted por su trayectoria y conocimiento una condición contextual en la cual estamos en un momento coyuntural en Colombia, y es un cambio de gobierno. Ese cambio de gobierno trae consigo unas consignas que tienen que ver con características interculturales, decoloniales y otras cuantas perspectivas, y que a la vez coincide con un programa nacional de bilingüismo que culmina este año, y que por tanto se va a proyectar uno que tiene que ver 2022 o 2023, asumo hasta el 2026. Entonces le quiero hacer dos preguntas. La primera tiene que ver en cómo se ajusta esta agenda intercultural en una proyección que usted tenga de una propuesta de un programa nacional de bilingüismo que obviamente deberá estar en construcción. Y segundo, ¿cuáles son los mecanismos para nosotros como participantes de esta discusión para entrar a esa formulación de la nueva propuesta del Programa Nacional de Bilingüismo que debe construirse bajo, obviamente, todo ese contexto que hay en esta propuesta de gobierno, que tiene que ver mucho con elementos como Ministerio de Igualdad, etc., etc., etc.? Dejo ahí esas dos preguntas. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Daniel. No, pues yo creo que lo primero que hay que hacer es yo creo que cada universidad debería manifestarse, ¿no? Nosotros como Universidad de Antioquia estamos escribiendo un documento al Ministerio de Educación en este momento, y en ese documento lo que estamos haciendo es planteándole al nuevo ministro una serie de retos, y desde la Escuela de Idiomas estamos incluyendo allí unas palabritas, y es en el sentido de que nosotros necesitamos políticas de lengua que promuevan la diversidad lingüística en el país, y que se muevan de ese modelo de bilingüismo español-inglés que básicamente lo que ha dejado de lado o no ha permitido o ha frenado es la diversidad lingüística en diferentes contextos educativos, y que además no responde a la diversidad del país. Pues entonces nosotros estamos manifestándole al ministerio que para responder a eso pues se necesita hacer varias cosas. Una de ellas es crear una mesa de trabajo liderado por las universidades colombianas, en las cuales las mismas universidades planteen hacia dónde debería moverse el país en términos de lenguas y de lenguas extranjeras. ¿Por qué? No, porque consideramos que seguir dependiendo del Consejo Británico para que nos definan cuáles deben ser las políticas nacionales, pues no tiene sentido, y que está más que demostrado que no solamente no tiene sentido, sino que no tiene ningún impacto, porque si miramos los resultados en los últimos 15 años, pues básicamente vemos que las políticas de lengua extranjera, inglés-español, o de bilingüismo español-inglés han sido un fracaso. Entonces nosotros lo que estamos planteando es la necesidad de que nos sentemos a conversar como país en torno a cuáles son las políticas de lenguas ancestrales, pero también de lenguas extranjeras que necesita el país, y cuál va a ser el rol que el ministerio va a jugar en todo eso. Eso no significa que ahora todos nos vamos a ir en contra del inglés, o que entonces vamos a decir que es que nadie tiene que aprender inglés o francés u otras lenguas extranjeras, y que todo el mundo tiene que empezar a aprender son lenguas colombianas. No creo eso. Pero sí necesitamos una visión que sea más incluyente, y que lo uno no vaya en contravía de lo otro, y que incluso haya diversidad lingüística a la hora, por ejemplo, de reconocerle a una persona en una universidad su competencia en segunda lengua, y que políticas como la de la Universidad de Antioquia, que está fijada solo en el inglés, pues puedan convertirse en políticas plurilingües, que es lo que le vamos a proponer nosotros al Consejo Académico en los próximos días, a partir de la evaluación que estamos haciendo del programa institucional de inglés, y que ya lo tenemos conversado con el equipo rectoral, y creemos que eso va a ser aceptado, y es una política plurilingüe donde las personas puedan cumplir con el requisito de lengua extranjera, pero ya como requisito de segunda lengua, y que pueda ser cualquiera de las lenguas que yo les mostraba que se ofrecen en la universidad, pueda ser reconocida como requisito de grado. Entonces, pero eso, yo creo que para poder llegar acá tuvimos que haber pasado por esos años. Desde el 2014 creo que les mostré que fue el acuerdo académico. Llevamos 8 años de implementación de ese acuerdo académico, y básicamente nos demuestra la implementación que es necesario movernos hacia un acuerdo académico plurilingüe, una política institucional plurilingüe. Y es en el mismo sentido que tenemos que plantearle al Ministerio de Educación. Ahora, ¿cuál es el rol que todos debemos jugar? Pues yo pensaría que lo primero que deberíamos hacer es que todas las universidades se pronunciaran y empezaran a plantearle ideas al ministerio. Yo, de hecho, desde el cargo que tengo ahorita como director de la Escuela de Idiomas, voy a enviar una comunicación a todos los directores y decanos que formamos lenguas en Colombia en las universidades públicas, para que creemos una mesa de trabajo nacional, donde entre todos, pues no solamente compartamos experiencias, sino que también nos manifestemos frente al gobierno nacional, buscando que, vuelvo y digo, que no sea el Consejo Británico el que nos defina. Eso es más o menos lo que yo pienso que debemos hacer. Lo primero es manifestarnos, y lo segundo es tratar de ser coherentes en nuestras propias instituciones. Voy a decir algo, pero bueno, coherentes en todo sentido, ¿cierto? En todos los momentos. Desde las políticas de admisión que tenemos en las universidades hasta las políticas de egreso. ¿Por qué lo digo? Porque todavía hay universidades, no sé si es la UTP, creo que sí, pero si no, me pongo muy feliz. Pero hay muchas universidades en Colombia que tienen como requisito de admisión las pruebas ICFES, las pruebas Saber 11. Y en esas pruebas Saber 11 incluyen el puntaje en la prueba de inglés. algo que es altamente inequitativo si tenemos en cuenta que hay una relación directa entre el nivel de inglés que obtiene la persona y su estrato socioeconómico, porque sabemos que aprender inglés en el sistema educativo de la educación básica y media es un lujo de unas pocas personas y está asociado directamente con asuntos como el tipo de colegio en el que estudia, cuánta plata tiene usted para pagar por un curso particular de inglés y si es de origen rural o urbano. Entonces hay una serie de factores que necesariamente, si usted tiene en cuenta ese puntaje de inglés a la hora de admitir a un estudiante en la educación superior pública, básicamente está marcando quiénes pueden o no pueden ingresar a la universidad. Entonces hay que hacer un análisis desde las mismas políticas de ingreso, pero una vez tenemos los estudiantes en la institución, hay que hacer un análisis de qué se le está exigiendo al estudiante y qué se está promoviendo o no. Ahora, una vez tenemos las políticas institucionales y buscamos ser coherentes con ellas, pues también hay que empezar a desmarcarse, tampoco sé si la UTP cae acá o no, pero hay que empezar a desmarcarse también de esos modelos coloniales, de cuáles son los exámenes que estamos creando, que estamos utilizando, cuáles son los textos, por qué esos textos, por qué no otros, etcétera, etcétera, que nos permita empezar a crear nuevas formas de entender las cosas y de hacerlas. Y luego de que cuestionemos eso, bueno, ¿cuál es la política de egreso? ¿Estamos exigiendo a los estudiantes, a todos, que tienen que ser solamente una lengua como el inglés o les podemos aceptar otras lenguas? O sea, hay mucho por hacer ahí, hay mucho por hacer. Yo pienso que lo primero es también, bueno, aparte de manifestarnos y empezar a trabajar como en redes, otro asunto es mirarnos nosotros a nivel, digamos, institucional, que podemos ir cambiando. Yo digo que en muchas universidades están cambiando cosas. Yo tengo la posibilidad de hablar con muchas personas y yo sé que, por ejemplo, en la red en la que estamos nosotros compartimos muchas experiencias y nos ayudamos. La profe Jimena, por ejemplo, buen día, a la Universidad de Sucre, cuando en alguna ocasión en la red hablábamos sobre los cursos de multilingüe que nosotros tenemos, esos cursos los ayudé a crear yo. Eso fue una complejidad, ahorita les cuento si quieren, pero cuando hablábamos de esos cursos de lenguas ancestrales, algo que digamos, a ella le resonaba mucho y decía, ¿por qué no enseñamos palenquero acá en la Universidad de Sucre? Y se buscó un líder docente que habla palenquero y creamos entre ellos y nosotros el curso de palenquero en la Universidad de Sucre, una lengua local que ellos tienen allá y que nos enseñaba en la universidad. O sea, ese tipo de cosas se pueden hacer, alianzas entre nosotros mismos para promover esa diversidad lingüística en cada uno de los territorios. Miren que hay muchas cosas que se pueden ir haciendo. En la Universidad del Valle, por ejemplo, ahorita están trabajando en una política lingüística, transformando la política que ellos tienen. Entonces, mire que se pueden ir haciendo muchas cosas. Dale, Juan.
All right, we're about to finish actually, but I see that it's also a hand raised. I don't know if Professor Sanchez kept the hand raised.
Casi no se te escucha, Juan.
Oh, no, not working. There's someone with their hand raised. I don't know if Professor Sanchez raised it again or kept her hand raised. Not working.
Profe Juan Manuel, no se escucha nada. Entonces, ahí, ¿qué fue? Ahí sí. Ahí sí.
Okay, we're back. Okay. Yeah, I was asking you, you raised your hand, Professor Sanchez. I don't know if you have a question or you just kept your hand raised for last time.
One more question. Actually,
okay,
we have
last question.
Ajá. La pregunta que yo le voy a hacer al profe Usma en este momento va muy relacionada a lo que él nos estaba contando de todo lo que ellos han logrado hacer en la Universidad de Antioquia. Ellos nos llevan años luz en ese trabajo, pues comparado con lo que en este momento pues tiene la Universidad Tecnológica. Nosotros más o menos desde el 2018, a finales, empezamos a estructurar una propuesta del estudio sociolingüístico de las comunidades indígenas de la universidad, y pues fue más o menos cómo me conecté con el profe Usma y cómo pues nosotros desde el programa de licenciatura en bilingüismo empezamos a ser parte de la red polidiversa que el profesor Usma nos estaba comentando. Profe, yo quería hacerle una pregunta. Nosotros, bueno, le digo dónde vamos. Nosotros hicimos el estudio y lo que salió de ese estudio fue una propuesta de 2 cátedras que se van a ofrecer abiertas a la universidad, a toda la población estudiantil. Una sobre cosmovisión indígena y la otra sobre interculturalidad crítica. En esa construcción de esa propuesta vamos. Sin embargo, nosotros pues somos casi los únicos en la UTP que estamos trabajando en esta temática que para nosotros pues como comunidad es muy importante, y es esa otra mirada hacia lo que es el bilingüismo también, ¿cierto? Esa mirada que nosotros pues somos una licenciatura con énfasis en inglés, sin embargo pues también hay que darle ese giro que le da ese componente contextual, donde estamos, en un país que es multicultural, plurilingüe, ¿cierto? Mi pregunta va relacionada específicamente con cómo se llega a impactar la política lingüística de la universidad, porque nosotros vemos esas posibilidades muy lejanas en la universidad. En este momento, y lo demostramos a través del estudio, los estudiantes que se reconocen como indígenas y que participaron en el estudio ven muchísimas cualidades a saber otra lengua, ¿cierto? Ellos lo ven viable por su perfil académico, por su perfil profesional, personal, etcétera, etcétera. Sin embargo, no hay reconocimiento a su bagaje sociolingüístico, ¿cierto? Pero ellos ven importante estudiar inglés. Muchos de ellos pues ya son bilingües con el español, ¿cierto? Que es su segunda lengua. Sin embargo, como lo mencionaba, vemos muy lejano ese impacto a la política lingüística de la universidad. ¿Qué sigue para nosotros? Que la Universidad de Antioquia ya, pues, en este momento diría yo que nos lleva años luz. Por ahí está la pregunta, profe, y también le quería mencionar que por ahí le han dejado un par de comentarios en la transmisión de YouTube. Creo que por ahí hay un comentario de la presidenta de su club de fans, Jennifer Vanegas, así que para que
Jefito.
seguro y lo vea.
Hola, Jefito. No, vea, yo pienso, Isa, muchas gracias por la pregunta. Pues lo primero que nosotros como investigadores tenemos a la mano son datos. Yo pienso que nosotros como investigadores con lo que podemos lograr un cambio es con datos. Y los administradores pues con propuestas, ¿cierto? Ahora, si somos investigadores y administradores, pues con ambas cosas. Es muy difícil que una institución se mueva hacia una nueva política si no tiene datos que muestren la necesidad de mover, de cambiar. Y cuando quiere cambiar, también los datos son fundamentales para poder tener, digamos, información sobre qué implica hacer el cambio. Entonces los datos son fundamentales. Por ejemplo, si nosotros sabemos que, todo eso que estás diciendo, Isa, si nosotros sabemos que en la universidad hay una gran diversidad lingüística que necesita ser promovida y que eso no va en contravía necesariamente, porque no tiene por qué ir en contravía con el aprendizaje de una lengua extranjera, porque de hecho lo que estás diciendo se corresponde mucho con lo que nosotros encontramos, donde el 84% de los estudiantes indígenas decían: yo también quiero aprender inglés. Es que yo no quiero que me posicionen como una persona incapaz o como una persona que por ser indígena no puedo aprender inglés. No, yo tengo las mismas capacidades que otra persona. Lo que pasa es que yo sí quiero aprender inglés, pero no así. Yo sí, o con esos propósitos coloniales que usted me dice. Es que yo tengo mis propios propósitos y mis propias formas, y si encontramos una forma de conciliar esos intereses que yo tengo con esa agenda institucional que puede ser muy válida de aprender inglés, pues entonces todos vamos a caminar hacia el mismo lado y eso nos va a servir a todos. El problema es que muchos de nosotros somos muy coloniales, entonces nosotros pensamos que es que el inglés es para ser competitivo en el mercado, o que el inglés es para la internacionalización de la universidad, y la internacionalización entendida como el posicionamiento de unos discursos internacionales que vienen a la universidad, etcétera, etcétera. mucha gente no convive con eso, mucha gente no come ese cuento, pero si nosotros empezamos a pensar en otras formas de entender las políticas lingüísticas y el inglés, y eso dialoga con los estudiantes indígenas y los afros, etcétera, pues es claro que eso va a tener un mejor resultado. Y si además se ve que hay interés, que hay decisión por promover el plurilingüismo en la universidad, pues claro que ahí mismo todas las tensiones se bajan, que eso es lo que ha pasado en la universidad. Si yo le digo a un estudiante, mire, estudia inglés, pero hombre, usted quiere aprender portugués, venga también. Pero usted quiere aprender escriol, venga también. Ahora, usted quiere aprender varias lenguas, venga, estúdielas todas, y todas son gratis. No es que la una es gratis y la otra le cobro, no. Ahora, ¿cuál es el siguiente paso que tenemos que dar? Que ya todas sean reconocidas como parte de su requisito de grado. Ese es el siguiente paso, pero ese lo damos este semestre. Pero nos tomó 8 años para llegar a ese punto. Entonces, las cosas tampoco se logran de un momento a otro. Pero yo creo, Isa, que es ir caminando, nos vamos yendo poco a poco, y también que cuando nos invitan a esos comités no nos dé miedo ir, porque es que a veces uno quiere hacer cosas, pero a las personas les da miedo ir a un comité académico, a un consejo académico, porque después dicen, vea, salió tal acuerdo y Jaime Usma fue parte de él y no hizo nada. Yo digo, no, si a mí me invitan, no es mejor que me inviten a mí a que inviten a otro que no sabe de eso, o a alguien que realmente no tiene la sensibilidad. Pues mejor que me inviten a mí. Ahora, yo tengo que reconocer que cuando yo voy a esos espacios, yo no las voy a ganar todas, pues. O sea, yo no voy a quedar de acuerdo con todo lo que allí se decide, pero yo sí creo que el acuerdo va a quedar mejor si estoy yo a que si no estoy, pues. Eso sí lo creo yo. Uno va ganando pequeñas, uno va teniendo victorias, pequeñas victorias, y así de a poquito uno va logrando cosas. Yo creo que eso es ISA. Eso es lo que hemos hecho acá nosotros. Pero no es fácil. O sea, ustedes me van a pedir, no, pero es que acá en la UDA eso es muy fácil. O sea, eso aquí todo se logra. No, que va. Eso es con lucha. Ustedes no se imaginan la lucha que a uno le toca dar para lograr cada cosita. Ahorita para lograr lo de el docente que va a llegar para lengua de señas colombiana, eso implica muchas cosas. ¿Sí? Hacer todo lo que estamos haciendo con el portugués, eso implica muchas cosas y no todo el mundo está de acuerdo. Mucha gente habla de plurilingüismo, interculturalidad,